Hello! Welcome once again to Pathways of Hope. My name is Jake Dan, and I'm really privileged to be giving today's reflection. And that's because of what we're celebrating here in the Catholic liturgical year this day. And you might know what it is already, but before I tell you or say it, I just want to give some perspective. You know those stories where you have a main character and he's doing something not so great, he's doing something evil. Let's say he's destroying nature or a rainforest or basically like pillaging trees and the wildlife because he's working for this corporate venture and he doesn't know anything about, what he's destroying. Yet throughout the story, he actually comes to appreciate it, come to love nature, comes to realize like why it needs to be preserved, that this corporate venture is really wrong. And he decides to start preserving it, protecting it, and say, okay, get lost to this corporate venture that he used to work for. Sound familiar? But on the other hand, we have also stories where you have like this bad guy and he's doing something evil, but towards the end of the plot, the whole, story, he experiences some change of heart because the good guy, talks some sense into him, he realizes his mistake, and he does something so pivotal that it changes the course of the plot for the good to win or triumph. Again, sound familiar? But before all these stories, basically, I'd say today's feast captures that. It's the feast of Paul the Apostle's conversion, his conversion. And I want to share about his story and zero in on three things. One, the character of Paul. Secondly, the character of Ananias. And lastly, what the gospel talks about. Let's look at Paul. Back then, he was Saul, a Pharisee, hardcore Jew, and to the point that he followed the law so much, he didn't like Christians. He didn't just not like Christians, he wanted to kill them. He wanted to get rid of Christians. They were like pests to him. It was a growing group, the church, the Christian group. They called it the Way. You can look at it at the Acts of the Apostles there in that book, there in the Bible. But basically, he's a character that wanted to obliterate them, to wipe them off the face of the world. He saw them as like some menacing group that was blasphemous. They were talking about Jesus Christ rising from the dead. And as a hardcore Jew, as a Pharisee, this was all heresy. This was blasphemy, and he wanted to just get rid of it. And as he's continuing this work, killing people, Jesus himself appears to him in a blinding light and says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Why are you persecuting me? And that's the beginning of that change. And we know now who he is, Saint Paul, as many call him, and the great work that he's performed. In fact, up to today, his very words, his very letters are still read, at gatherings as sources of encouragement, as things of inspiration, as God's very word that we believe in. And that's how much God has used someone of such sin. And I think that's something we can all think about and, relate with. No matter how deep we are in sin, God can still use us. God still calls us. And that's the power of coming into an encounter with the Lord himself. So think about that. That's one. Second, Ananias. He's very important in this story because sometimes many of us, we could identify as people who are, good in the faith. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm pretty good. I'm pretty chill. But we've been called to do something that might actually involve the risk of our lives. Because Ananias, as a Christian, he's persecuted. He's a minority. Suddenly, he's asked by Jesus, can you talk and pray over Saul? Can you talk with this very guy who's killing people like you? I don't know what you'd think. For me, I'd be scared. I'd just say, what is this request? Yet, would I not obey? That's what Ananias basically had. That's his disposition. The Lord said so let's do it. And I think that's also something we should think about. How we can also be Ananias to people, to other situations. Even if the invitation or the call is hard, even if we think we're in a good place, God wants to use us. God wants to allow transformation to happen. Not maybe in our own lives, but of course that was a transformative experience for him because he was able to talk with somebody who was persecuting people like him and actually be used by the Lord to allow his conversion, allow his change of heart so he could serve God as well. So I want to close with what the gospel says. It says there in Mark 16, Jesus' instruction to the apostles as he's resurrected from the dead, he's ascending into heaven. He says, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Tell the whole world of the gospel, every creature. And that's the whole point, to create or to allow the Lord to form more people like Paul. Without the gospel, without the good news, then people will not have this sort of encounter, this sort of conversion, this change of mind, change of state, to choose the good that God is offering us, the good news that we are invited to respond to. And we are really blessed to have someone like St. Paul, his words, the Lord using him to pierce our hearts, to allow us to experience renewal of our desire to follow him more and more, or to just discover more about God each day. And for that, let's be grateful. Let's celebrate this day. So that's a quick reflection for today. There's really more we could talk about with how great a man St. Paul is. And if you enjoyed this reflection, I invite you, you can follow the page, you can share it, and to more reflections to come. So God bless, and continue to allow the Lord to lead your path.